10 men burst into the diner at 2:47 a.m. Charles Lee didn't even have time to stand. A gun was already pointed at his face when the waitress moved. She smashed a coffee pot into the gunman's jaw, vaulted the counter, and dropped 3 men before Charles could blink. 43 seconds later, the diner was silent. 10 bodies on the floor. And Charles realized the woman serving him coffee wasn't a waitress at all. When the silence fell, it was deafening. Charles Lee pulled himself from behind the overturned booth, ears ringing, heart hammering against his ribs. Smoke hung in the air like fog. The smell of gunpowder and spilled coffee mixed with something darker, blood and death. The waitress stood in the center of the carnage, breathing steady, the gun loose in her hand. Her name tag read, Debbie. Her uniform was splattered with blood that wasn't hers. She stared at the bodies around her feet with an expression Charles recognized, the hollow look of someone who'd done this before. Many times before. "You should go," she said without looking at him. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Police will be here in 3 minutes." Charles stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. "You just saved my life. I didn't do it for you." She set the gun on the counter with careful precision. "I did it because they were sloppy and loud, and I was tired of running." Running from what? Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were dark, haunted, old beyond her years. "From people who make you look like a saint." Charles felt something shift in his chest. Recognition, maybe. Or curiosity. This woman was a mystery wrapped in violence, and he'd built an empire on understanding dangerous things. "What's your real name?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Does it matter? I'll be gone by sunrise." "The Red Pole Gang," Charles said. "That's who sent them. They'll have dashcam footage from their cars outside. Security cameras from the street. They'll find you." For the first time, he saw fear flicker across her face. Just for a moment, then it was gone. "Then I'll disappear. I'm good at that." Charles pulled out his phone, made 2 calls. Within 90 seconds, 3 black SUVs arrived. His men swept in like shadows, efficient and silent. They'd scrub the scene, handle the bodies, make it look like a gang war gone wrong. No witnesses. No evidence. The waitress watched it all with professional detachment. "You're Charles Lee," she said. "It wasn't a question. And you're not Debbie Martinez from Riverside." He stepped closer. "Military? CIA? Or something else entirely?" She turned away, started walking toward the back exit. "Goodbye, Mr. Lee." "They'll come for you," he called after her. "The Red Pole Gang doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. And now you're on their list." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "I've been on worse lists." Then she was gone. Charles stood alone in the empty diner, surrounded by his men cleaning up a massacre, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just met someone who would change everything. He'd built his empire on instinct, on reading people, on knowing when someone was worth the risk. And this woman, this ghost with a name tag and hollow eyes, she was worth it. He pulled out his phone again. "Jean, I need you to find someone for me." "Who?" "A waitress. Black woman, early 30s, military training. Working at the Starlight Diner under the name Debbie Martinez." "What do you want me to do when I find her?" Charles looked at the blood-stained counter, the overturned tables, the evidence of surgical violence. "Everything. I want to know everything. What secrets was she hiding? And why did saving a stranger feel like the biggest risk of her life? We would like to beg a favor. We have been dropping powerful videos daily, and we want you to help us grow by subscribing to our channel right now. Thank you for helping us grow. Drop your country and the time in the comments below. I love seeing this community span across the globe. Now let's return back to our character. 3 days later, Charles found her apartment. It was a run-down building in East LA, the kind of place people went to disappear. 4th floor, corner unit, one window facing the fire escape. He'd knocked twice before she answered. Deborah Cross, her real name, according to Jin's research, stood in the doorway with a knife behind her back. Charles could see it in the way she held her left arm, the tension in her shoulders. "The Red Pole Gang has dashcam footage of you," he said without preamble. "They know your face. They know this address. They're coming." Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "How did you find me?" "Security footage. Facial recognition." He held up his phone, showed her the screen. Her image flickered there, then disappeared. "But I scrubbed it all. Traffic cameras, ATMs, everything within a 2-mile radius of that diner. As far as anyone else knows, you don't exist." "Why?" "Because you saved my life. And because I think we can help each other." She laughed, short and bitter. "I don't need help from criminals." Charles smiled sadly. 3 nights ago, you killed 10 men without hesitation. Whatever you're running from, it made you just like me." The door started to close. Charles caught it with his hand. Deborah Cross, former Army, Special Operations, Syria deployment, 2019. Went dark in 2021. Military listed you as AWOL, then quietly reclassified it. They're not looking for you anymore, but they're not protecting you either. Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Get your hand off my door." 20 men, Charles said quietly. "That's what they'll send next time. The Red Pole Gang doesn't do subtle. They'll come through that door, through the window, maybe burn the whole building down. And you'll fight them, because that's what you do. But 20 against 1. He saw her jaw clench, saw the calculation in her eyes. She was running numbers, angles, survival odds. "What do you want?" "Work for me. 6 months. Help me strengthen security, train my people, handle the threats I can't see coming. In exchange, I protect you. New identity, safe house, legal documentation that'll hold up under federal scrutiny. And after 6 months, you walk away. Clean slate. New life. Anywhere you want to go." Deborah was silent for a long moment, studying his face. "You don't know what you're offering. The people looking for me, they make your gang war look like a playground fight. Then let me help you fight them." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I'm not running from the military. I'm running from someone worse. And if he finds me, everyone around me dies. Everyone." Charles stepped back, gave her space. He pulled out a card, set it on the floor between them. "Think about it. But don't think too long. The Red Pole Gang moves fast." He turned to leave, then paused. "That thing you did in the diner, the way you moved, that wasn't just training. That was survival. Someone taught you to fight like the world was ending, and you were the only one who could stop it." Deborah's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone did. Then let me be that someone who helps you survive what comes next." The door closed behind him. But Charles noticed she didn't lock it right away. She was considering it, weighing her options, calculating her odds. He'd give her 24 hours. Then he'd come back. Because the Red Pole gang was already moving. She thought she could hide forever. But some shadows never stop chasing you. They found her 4 days later in an industrial district near the port. Deborah had gone to meet a forger, someone who could give her papers good enough to disappear into Mexico. It was supposed to be a simple transaction. Cash for documents. No names. No questions. Instead, she walked into an ambush. The first attacker came from behind a shipping container. Deborah moved on instinct, sidestepped, grabbed his arm, used his momentum to slam him face first into the concrete. The second came from above, dropping from a container stack. She rolled, swept his legs, finished him with 2 quick strikes to the throat. The third pulled a knife. Deborah disarmed him, broke his wrist, used him as a human shield when the fourth opened fire. But there were more. Too many. The fifth attacker was different. Bigger. Faster. He moved like he'd trained at the same school she had, fought like he'd survived the same wars. They clashed in the narrow space between containers, blocks, strikes, counters. He caught her with an elbow to the ribs. She responded with a knee to his kidney. They circled each other, breathing hard, blood on both their faces. "The Red Pole sends their regards," he said, smiling. "They're paying triple for your head." Deborah said nothing. She was calculating distances, angles, escape routes. There were 6 more men fanning out around them, cutting off every exit. She'd survived worse. Syria had been worse. The warlord's camp had been worse. But she'd been younger then, less tired, less broken by the weight of all the running. The big attacker lunged. Deborah dodged left, straight into the arms of another man who'd circled behind her. He pinned her against a shipping container, and she felt cold metal press against her temple. "End of the line, sweetheart." Gunfire erupted from the far end of the lot. Charles Lee appeared with 8 of his men, and suddenly the odds shifted. The Red Pole attackers scattered, returned fire, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Charles's people moved with military precision, covering angles, flanking positions, surgical efficiency. The man holding Deborah hesitated, just for a second. It was enough. She twisted, broke his grip, took his gun and put 3 rounds center mass. Then she was moving again, fighting alongside Charles's men like she'd trained with them for years. When the silence fell, 7 bodies lay scattered among the containers. The rest had fled. Deborah stood in the center of it all, bleeding from a knife wound in her side, breathing hard. Charles approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Hospital?" he asked. She shook her head. "Safe house. I'll stitch it myself. I have a doctor." Discreet. "I said I'll do it myself." But her voice cracked slightly, and Charles saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of too many fights, too many close calls, too many years running. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let me help." Deborah looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd saved her life twice now, who'd offered her something no one else had in 3 years, a chance to stop running. 6 months, she said finally. "And then I disappear." 6 months, Charles agreed. He didn't tell her what he was already starting to suspect. That 6 months wouldn't be enough. That once you found someone worth protecting, you didn't let them go. That maybe, just maybe, she'd found the one person who could stand between her and the darkness chasing her. But some debts can never be repaid. And some promises are impossible to keep. 6 months became 8. Deborah had transformed Charles's operation from the inside out. She'd redesigned his security protocols, identified moles in his organization, trained his guards to move and think like soldiers instead of street thugs. She was brilliant, efficient, and utterly ruthless when necessary. She was also the most haunted person Charles had ever met. He found her one night on the rooftop of his building, staring at the city lights like they held answers to questions she couldn't voice. It was 3 in the morning. He'd woken to find her side of the bed empty, a recent development, the sharing of space and warmth, though neither of them had put words to what was growing between them. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Never could. Not since Syria." Charles handed her the coffee he'd brought. She took it, their fingers brushing. Even that small touch felt significant now. "Tell me about it," he said quietly. Deborah was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Special operations. My unit was tracking a weapons smuggler through the Syrian desert. We got bad intel. Walked straight into a trap." She took a sip of coffee, and Charles saw her hands trembling slightly. "A warlord named Morgan Kahani. He killed 6 of my team immediately. Kept me and 3 others alive. Said he'd execute them one by one unless I worked for him." Her voice went flat, empty. "So I did. For 14 months, I did things for him. Terrible things. Things that made me a traitor in the eyes of my own government." "That's not being a traitor," Charles said. "That's surviving. Tell that to the villages I helped him raid. The people I hurt. The missions I compromised." She turned to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks. "I got out eventually. Killed his second-in-command and 4 guards. Freed what was left of my unit. But the military couldn't bring me home. Too many questions. Too much I'd done under his control. So they branded me AWOL and moved on." Charles reached out, brushed a tear from her cheek. "You did what you had to do." "Did I?" She laughed bitterly. "Sometimes I think I should have let him kill me. Would have saved a lot of people a lot of pain." "Don't say that." "Why not?" "It's true." "Because you're here." Charles moved closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Because you saved my life in that diner. Because you've spent 8 months protecting people who don't deserve your protection. Because you're still fighting, still surviving, still trying." Deborah looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "Why do you care?" "Because I see you," he whispered. "The real you. Not the soldier. Not the survivor. You. And she's extraordinary." He kissed her then, soft and careful, and Deborah kissed him back like she was drowning and he was air. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm going to bring darkness into your life," she whispered. "Morgan is still out there. If he finds me, then we deal with it. Together. You don't understand. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. And he always finds what's his." Charles cupped her face in his hands. "You were never his. And I'm not afraid of your darkness." He should have been. Because 3 weeks later, the nightmares started. And 2 weeks after that, the first bomb went off. The past never stays buried. And some monsters never stop hunting. The warehouse explosion lit up the Los Angeles skyline like a second sunrise. Deborah stood across the street, watching the flames consume one of Charles's primary storage facilities. $15 million in imported electronics. Gone. But that wasn't the message. The message was in the body they'd found in the rubble. Charles's security chief, tortured before he died, and carved into his chest in precise Arabic script, "I'm coming for what's mine." "Morgan," Deborah whispered, and the name tasted like ashes in her mouth. Charles stood beside her, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with his people. His face was stone, but she could see the fury in his eyes. In the 3 weeks since the warehouse bombing, they'd lost 2 restaurants, a lawyer's office, and 17 men. Morgan Kahani was waging war, and he was winning. When Charles finally ended the call, he turned to her. Security footage from the warehouse. One of Morgan's lieutenants was there, supervising. Deborah closed her eyes. Rashid. He was Morgan's enforcer in Syria. "Can you identify the others?" "All of them. I trained with them." She opened her eyes, and Charles saw the horror blooming there. He brought his entire command structure. "This isn't a raid. This is an invasion." Charles pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest. She was shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. Every person Morgan killed, every building he destroyed, it was because of her. "Let me go," she whispered against his shirt. "Let me run. He'll follow me, and your family will be safe." "No, Charles. No." He gripped her shoulders, forced her to look at him. "I'm not losing you. We end this. Together. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then help me understand. Tell me everything. Every detail about Morgan Kahani. How he thinks. How he moves. His strengths. His weaknesses. Everything." Deborah wanted to argue, wanted to run. It's what she'd always done, protect herself by protecting others through distance. But she was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of letting fear control her choices. And more than that, she'd found something here. With Charles. Something worth fighting for. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. But you need to know what we're walking into. Morgan doesn't fight fair. He doesn't value human life. And he'll burn this entire city down to get to me." Charles smiled grimly. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance." They spent the next 72 hours planning. Deborah drew maps of Morgan's likely positions, identified his patterns, predicted his next moves. Charles mobilized every resource he had: soldiers, weapons, intelligence networks. They fortified every property, moved vulnerable families to safe locations, prepared for war. But Morgan moved faster. The 4th attack came at dawn. A restaurant owned by Charles's uncle. 12 people inside. Morgan's men torched it while they slept. When Deborah saw the news footage, she made her decision. "Set up a meeting," she told Charles. "Tell him I'll surrender. Neutral ground. Just me and him. It's a trap. He'll kill you. I know. That's why you're going to kill him first." Sometimes the only way to end a nightmare is to walk straight into it. They chose an abandoned factory at the port for the meeting. Morgan had agreed immediately, too immediately, which meant he suspected a trap. But he'd come anyway, because that's what predators did. They couldn't resist the hunt, even when they knew the prey might bite back. Charles positioned 40 men in the shadows around the factory. Snipers on every roof with clear sight lines. Assault teams ready to move on his signal. It was overkill, maybe. But Morgan Kahani had proven he wasn't a man who fell easily. Deborah stood in the center of the empty factory floor, alone. She wore a simple black shirt and jeans, no armor, no visible weapons. Her hands were raised, non-threatening. But Charles knew there were knives strapped to her ankles, a gun at the small of her back. She'd never truly be unarmed. Survival had taught her that. Through the scope of his rifle from the elevated position, Charles watched her face. She looked calm, resigned, like she'd accepted that this was always how it would end. Standing in an empty building, waiting for the monster from her past to collect his due. He wouldn't let that happen. Morgan Kahani entered through the main loading bay doors precisely at midnight. He brought 20 men with him, all heavily armed. They fanned out in a practiced formation. Morgan had always been a tactician. He stood in the center of his soldiers, and even from a distance, Charles could see the predatory smile on his face. "Deborah," Morgan called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I've missed you." "Let's finish this," she replied, her voice steady. Morgan stepped forward, his men moving with him like a living shadow. "Did you really think you could hide from me? That I wouldn't find you? You belong to me, Deborah. You always have. I never belonged to you. I survived you. There's a difference." Morgan laughed, a sound without humor. "You killed for me, bled for me, became the perfect weapon for me. That's not survival. That's destiny." Charles watched through his scope as Deborah's hands clenched into fists. He could read her body language now, after months of training together, sleeping together, learning each other's tells. She was fighting not to shake, fighting to hold on to her composure. Morgan kept walking, kept closing the distance. "Come home, Deborah. Stop running. Accept what you are." "What I am," Deborah said quietly, "is someone who's done running." That's when Morgan's second-in-command stiffened. His head snapped up, scanning the rafters, the shadows, the darkened corners of the factory. Years of combat experience screaming at him that something was wrong. "Boss," he said urgently, "this is wrong. It's too quiet, too empty." Morgan's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed, calculating, assessing. And Charles saw the exact moment when the warlord understood the trap. "Ambush," Morgan snarled. "Kill them all." Charles's voice came through the radio, calm and clear. "Light them up." The factory erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Bullets sparked off metal and concrete. Morgan's men scattered, returning fire, but they were outpositioned and outgunned. Charles's people had every angle covered, every escape route blocked. But Morgan wasn't like other men. He'd survived wars, coups, assassination attempts. He knew how to fight when the odds turned against him. And he knew exactly who to blame. When monsters corner their prey, they become more dangerous than ever. Deborah dove behind a stack of crates as bullets chewed through the air where she'd been standing. She pulled the gun from her back, returned fire, dropped 2 of Morgan's men who'd broken from cover. Around her, the factory had become a war zone. Gunfire, shouting, the acrid smell of cordite and blood. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, years of training taking over. Muscle memory. Survival instinct. The same skills Morgan had weaponized in Syria were now being turned against him. Through the haze of gun smoke, she saw him, Morgan, moving toward a side exit with 3 of his remaining men. He was retreating, but not fleeing. Planning. Regrouping. If he escaped tonight, this war would never end. "No," Deborah whispered. She sprinted after him, weaving between shipping containers and machinery. Bullets sparked off metal around her. She didn't slow down. She couldn't. This ended tonight, one way or another. She caught Morgan at the loading bay entrance, tackled him through the doorway into an open yard beyond. They rolled across concrete, came up fighting. His men raised their weapons. Charles's snipers dropped them before they could fire. Now it was just Deborah and Morgan. The way it should have been from the beginning. They fought hand to hand, brutal and desperate. Morgan was older but vicious, and he'd trained her once. He knew her moves, anticipated her strikes. His knife sliced across her ribs. His fist cracked into her jaw. Blood filled her mouth. "You were always weak," Morgan snarled, slamming her against a concrete pillar. "Emotional. Soft. That's why you needed me. I made you strong." "You made me a prisoner," Deborah gasped, blocking his next strike. "I made you perfect." He drove his knife toward her chest. She caught his wrist, barely, muscles screaming. They strained against each other, faces inches apart. "You were mine," he hissed. "You'll always be mine." Deborah's vision blurred. Her strength was failing. 14 months of torture, 3 years of running, 8 months of fighting. It was all catching up to her. She couldn't hold him much longer. Morgan's knife inched closer to her heart. Then Charles appeared behind him, gun raised, and his voice was ice-cold fury. "She was never yours." He fired once. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. Morgan's eyes went wide. He stumbled, the knife clattering from his hand. He fell to his knees, then collapsed face first onto the concrete. Dead. Deborah slid down the pillar, gasping, bleeding. Charles dropped to his knees beside her, holstering his weapon, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." Deborah clung to him, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from pain or fear, but from relief. The nightmare that had chased her across continents, through years of sleepless nights and constant terror, was finally dead. "You saved me," she whispered. Charles pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You saved me first. In that diner. Remember." She laughed through her tears. "Worst decision I ever made. Best decision I ever witnessed." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and Deborah kissed him back like she was finally home. Sometimes the only way to find peace is to face the war inside yourself. Deborah Cross stood on the balcony of their home overlooking the Pacific, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Behind her, she could hear her daughter playing piano, Chopin, one of the easier nocturnes. Her son was in the kitchen helping Charles make dinner, their laughter drifting through the open doors. A life built from blood and bullets and somehow, impossibly, love. The military had cleared her record 18 months after Morgan's death. Charles's lawyers had presented evidence of her coercion, testimony from the surviving members of her unit, documentation of Morgan's war crimes. The brand of traitor had been erased, replaced with commendations for survival and bravery under impossible circumstances. She'd never wear the uniform again. That part of her life was over. But at least now, she could walk in daylight without looking over her shoulder. Charles had kept his promise too. Over the past decade, he'd systematically dismantled his criminal empire and rebuilt it as something legitimate. Real estate development, technology investment, community programs. It hadn't been easy. Some battles couldn't be won with violence, only patience and time. But they'd done it together. "What are you thinking about?" Charles asked, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. Deborah leaned back against him, watching the sun sink into the ocean. That diner. How I almost didn't intervene. How I was so close to just staying invisible. But you didn't. No. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his cheek. I saved a stranger at 2:47 in the morning, and he saved me right back. Every day since. Charles smiled, that same soft smile that had convinced her, 10 years ago, that maybe she deserved something more than running and hiding. Any regrets? Deborah thought about it, really thought about it. The violence, the fear, the years of nightmares that still occasionally woke her in the dark hours before dawn. The scars she'd carry forever, inside and out. Not one, she said. From inside, their daughter called that dinner was ready. Their son shouted something about burning the garlic bread. Normal, domestic, beautiful. Deborah Cross had spent years running from her past. Now, finally, she was home. She took Charles's hand, and together they walked inside to the family they'd built from the ashes of everything they'd lost. To the life that had started with 10 men in a diner and a waitress who decided, for the first time in 3 years, to stop running and start fighting back. What would you have done in that diner? Would you have stayed hidden, or would you have fought back? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to stop running and start living, hit that subscribe button. Your next heart-stopping story of love, redemption, and second chances is just one click away. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see the real you, even the parts you think are broken.